Do you have something that you truly, relentlessly desire? Despite your state of life, is there something else that you would go completely to the end of the world to get? Well, lucky for you, there's a way to achieve what you're looking for, and you won't need to go to the end of the world to get it. But you will need to go somewhere, and the place may be too out of reach for some. It's not far away, closer than one may believe, but there are certain requirements that some individuals may not meet. First, whatever it is that you seek, know that you must seriously desire what you want. In your eyes, it should be something you need. If you begin the journey without the correct state of mind, you will surely fail, as it will be near impossible to turn back once the journey begins. The second requirement is that you need a vehicle of sort. Most use a car, as it's the most comfortable choice. There have been a select few that have used small motorized vehicles, such as an ATV or motorcycle, but this has proven to be quite difficult, as the conditions of the journey can prove to be too bothersome. Do not use a vehicle too large or noticeable, as you will need some cover of night to be most safe. Also, while any sort of car will do, you may not want to choose the most expensive or cherished vehicle. You can take your slick new black Mercedes for the drive if you'd like, but don't expect it to come out in a pristine state. Make sure your vehicle is completely fueled before beginning the drive. The first task to accomplish is to locate the road. It doesn't have a name, it's not on a map, and technically, it doesn't even exist. It will only show up if you're looking for it at the right time, and you will only spot it if you know what to look for. Finally, you must be alone during the journey. You didn't think you'd be able to go with the group now, did you? It must be night when you begin. Choose the time of night where you believe the roads are the least populated. Drive to any area that is just a stretch of road surrounded by woods. Here's where you want to start paying close attention. If you're looking for the road, it will turn up eventually, but you need to search for the road's hint in order to pull down the right one. Once you're close, you will see or feel its signs, but what signs will be depends on what your desire is. For example, if you're in search of wealth, you may spot shimmers on the empty branches of trees, as if they resemble the shine of gold or diamonds. If you seek love, you may begin to see rose petals slowly dance in the light breeze, blowing in the road's direction. If you seek revenge, you might sense an ever-growing feeling of heat or anger in your body as you approach. Just know what it is you really want, and you'll have no problem finding the turn. Once you're sure you've found the revealed road, take a deep breath and turn down onto it. At this point, you have officially started down the nameless road, which brings you through 7 miles, leading to whatever it is you seek. Each mile will test your desire and will expose if you really do want what you're searching for. Before you go any further, stop the car and be wary of a few advisements. Do not turn on the radio during the drive. Do not use a phone during the drive. Do not open the windows during the drive. Make sure they are closed before you continue. If you are riding a vehicle without windows or a top, then prepare for the worst, as the odds are heavily stacked against you. Do not attempt to leave your vehicle at any time. You'll never want to exceed 30 miles per hour, unless you're desperate to make it through a section of the road. And most importantly, as with any drive, buckle up. Feel free to prepare and make sure you're ready. Once the road has been entered, time has stopped, so you don't need to worry about losing the night. Though you may not notice, you're not actually in your own world anymore. Take one last moment to realize that once the first mile is over, there's no turning back. If you ponder turning back at all, know that you shouldn't even be on the journey in the first place. Once all is done, start continuing on the road. On the first mile, you won't see much change. The road passes through mostly woods, with a few miles being an exception. The air will turn a bit colder, in which you should turn on your heating system if the vehicle has one. You won't want to take your eyes off the road later. Take some time to calm any uneasiness by admiring some of the night sky. You'll see it completely lined with the stars, more than what you would ever believe possible. If the weather was cloudy beforehand, you'll also notice that the sky is now clear. On the second mile, the air will become even colder. This is primarily the reason why traveling in an open vehicle is very difficult. With each mile, the air will drop in temperature, even if the season should be warm. If the air is too cold to bear, even with the heat on, your only option is to speed up. With each mile, the road also becomes more complex, taking more turns and showing an increasing amount of road hazards. Be sure to always keep focused on the road in front of you, in order to avoid as many bumps or obstacles as possible. Hitting a few rocks and potholes won't hamper your progress too much, but you'll want to keep in the best condition for as long as possible. If your vehicle is forced to stop because of damage, then there's nothing left you can do but eventually freeze to death. On the third mile, you may begin to spot silhouettes of human figures in the lining of the trees. Pay no attention to them, even if they seem to get closer. It will be hard to resist peeking at their unnerving, distant appearance, but know that they will eventually reveal themselves later. At this mile, the road will become dirt if you weren't already driving on it in the beginning. Keep to the center of the path, as it will become narrow and wide at random intervals. On a quick side note, you should never attempt to turn around. You'll be left on a path which never ends. You would simply run out of fuel eventually, and be left to freeze in the cold conditions. On the fourth mile, you will not only see more of the figures, but you will begin to, in a sense, hear them. In the back of your mind, a very faint, unintelligible whisper will echo. These will come and go, but you can't stop them. If they become too bothersome or distracting, try and tune them out by thinking of what it is you desire. Attempting to listen and determine what the voices are saying will only attract them to you, and you want to be as far away from them as you can. They'll be closer later, so there's no use in bringing them near you this early. On the fifth mile, you will come to a clearing. The lining of trees to your left will disappear, to reveal a lake with no end, and a beaming great moon over the water. The illumination from the moon will be so spectacular that your vehicle's headlights will no longer be required. Restrain yourself from gazing at it. If you look at its light for even more than a few seconds, the road in front of you will end, throwing your vehicle into the water, in which you will freeze in mere minutes. The voices will be gone for this mile, but don't rejoice yet. They'll be back. On the sixth mile, take into account that you are more than halfway done. Despite the progress, you may lose hope here. The stars will have disappeared at this point, leaving the sky an empty black abyss. The clearing will have ended, leading you back into the woods. The only light you will have will be provided by your vehicle's headlights, but they will flicker from time to time, even if you're sure they're in perfect working order. If you have a radio in the vehicle, it will turn on here automatically. If you didn't turn it off beforehand, it will produce an overwhelming screech that will send you off the path. A calm voice will then begin to speak about your greatest fears, what it is you absolutely fear in your life. It will speak in a way that will cause you to visualize the words in your mind, so don't listen to it. If you begin to comprehend what it's saying, the horrors will prove too much for you to stay on the road safely. Attempting to turn off the radio will prove no use. Speed up if you need to. Just keep your mind off the voices as much as you can. As you approach the end of the mile, the voice will fade out of the speakers, leaving your ears at peace. For now. On the 7th mile, the voices from the figures will return. It won't sound like a whisper this time, but more like distant screams, growing closer with each second. At some point on this mile, you'll hear one of them in your ear, as if one of them were right behind you. This is because one of the figures have found their way into your vehicle. Do not turn around. Their faces will shock you to paralysis, leading you off the road. If you do not draw attention to it, it will become uninterested and hopefully leave. These beings are said to be the one who have traveled down this road before, but were not successful. They lived the remainder of their existence suffering in the darkness, with their only goal of being to bring other travelers down with them. It has been said from experience that these beings can't physically harm you, so as long as they don't cause you to wreck, you should be fine. On the 8th mile, the road here takes very sharp turns, which if overshot, will lead you to throw the vehicle into a pit through the trees. The cold is near fatal here. If you were going to have a glass or bottle of liquid in your vehicle, it would appear solid in mere seconds. The heating system will have become completely obsolete. Your headlights will flicker more, sometimes shutting off for a few seconds. You should brake if this happens, but do not completely stop. The figures will be following you at this point, and you should not stop for too long. They will surround and trap your vehicle. More of their screams can be heard from outside your doors, sometimes even sounding of maniacal laughter. Their hands will claw at your windows, desperate to reach in and feel something living. Do not look at them. They won't block your windshield, and the last thing you want to happen is to crash and be trapped with them. If you don't make it from here, pray that it's the freezing that ends you. On the 9th mile, your vehicle will stall, the headlights will shut off, as will all other systems inside. There's nothing you can do to prevent this. What you will need to do is close your eyes and immediately attempt to restart the vehicle. Keep your eyes closed, as the figures would have surely surrounded you at this point. The starting of the vehicle will frighten them, and they will all back away temporarily. This will give you a chance to start moving forward again. If you begin to hear the windows crack from their struggle, don't lose focus. The beings can alter the vehicle, but remember that they still do not have the strength to physically affect you. You will hear nothing but their voices rampage in your mind, as there could be anywhere between a dozen or 100 of them after you now. Once you start the vehicle, floor it. Floor it so long as you can stay on the path. When the mile's done, the beings will retreat. On the 10th mile, the voices of the beings will stop. If you were to look in your rearview mirror, you'll see them following you, but not as if they were chasing. They're watching you, as if they were seeing you off. As you go down the 10th mile, the road will be smoother, as if you were back on the 1st mile. The figures will be lining the sides of the path ahead of you. They won't be after you, but they will watch as you pass. Some have theorized that the beings are impressed here, that you have come a long way on the journey to what you desire. This is false. They are not impressed, but they are happy. They are happy you are about to approach the next mile. They are happy because you are most likely going to your death. On the 11th and final mile, everything in your vehicle will lose power, as it did on the 9th mile. The vehicle would normally be immobile, but you will still be moving. An unknown force will be pulling you forward. In the darkness, you will see a glowing red light up ahead, as if it were a light at the end of a tunnel. Close your eyes and cover them. Do whatever it takes to make sure you do not see what you are about to go through. Covering your ears would also be helpful, but keeping your eyes covered should be the higher priority. The red light is another clearing, but there's no moon or lake this time. Once it's entered, unrelenting and inconceivable noises will sound from all directions. No amount of bravery and conditioning will spare you from these sounds. The cold will turn to a merciless heat, burning all parts of the vehicle. You will feel the illusion of the flesh being burned off your bones, that every part of you is being destroyed as you travel through the screams and audible suffering. As long as you keep your eyes closed and resist the urge to see where you are, you will survive through the suffering. This will last a total of 31 seconds, but many fail to keep their vision closed during that time and are left to the worst fate of the road. Where is this mile located? Those who have survived do not know. Some have named it the transmission from hell, but whether it's part of hell is debatable. After the final mile, power will return. Stop the vehicle. Take a moment to possibly regain some of your sanity. Let the screaming in your ears begin to fade, and know that you have nearly completed your journey, with the hardest task overcome. Breathe, and begin to drive forward once again. After only a kilometer, your vehicle will arrive at a dead end. Stop here, and don't attempt to move again. Nothing will happen right this second, but do not be disappointed. Relax and close your eyes. Imagine in your mind what it is you've desired the entire time. It will most likely still be the same as when you entered, but with some, this desire may actually change through making this journey. Think about what it is that you went through, such terrifying and difficult means to acquire, and imagine possessing it in your hands. Once you have completely visualized this, slowly open your eyes. You will then find yourself at the beginning of the unnamed road, where you first began. This may confuse you, but know that you are finished. Your task is done. Your mind will then return to your reward. If what you desired was material, check in the back seat, or in the trunk if the object is larger. If the object was small enough, it might already be in your pocket. If what you desired was non-material, then do not be disappointed if the change is not immediate. Turn back to where you came from, and you will find in your life that what you wanted is there. You may have found the love of your dreams. You may have gained unnatural, unimaginable power. You may have put your most hated enemy to the most satisfying revenge possible. You will have no doubt gained what you deserved. So now that the task is done, what's the catch? Is your vehicle cursed? Is there something you're about to lose? Is your death imminent? The answer to all is no, of course. You've done the challenge. You've proved worthy to what you desire. As stated before, the sounds of the 11th mile will continue to exist in your mind, potentially causing you some vivid and unusual nightmares, but these should prove as nothing compared to what you've gained. Now, one last question. Is there something else you desire? Are you not yet satisfied? After all, you're right back where you started. The road's right in front of you. So are you up for another drive? If so, buckle up and just move forward. I've had a fear of rats for as long as I can remember. I don't know exactly what it is about them that scares me. It's not just the tail or the way they move or how they sound. It's everything, and it's nothing. To me, rats have always been synonymous with unconditional terror. It all comes from a childhood trauma. A large rat chased me up a hill where I had to hide in a tool shed. The thing seemed rabid, and I had to sit in there for at least an hour, listening to the squeals and cries of the desperate thing that wanted to eat me. It was an unusually big rat, larger than some cats I've seen. It's called phobia, and up until recently, it hasn't really been an issue. I mean, sure, I can get panic attacks and a flight reaction by just seeing one, but I've been able to keep them out of my life more often than not. Sure, now that I'm a parent, I won't let my 2 kids have a hamster, but I'm pretty sure the Yorkshire Terrier we have keeps them busy. My phobia became an issue not too long ago. I was driving the kids home from school. Traffic was being rerouted for maintenance, so I had to take a smaller dirt road instead of staying on the main. It wasn't far, and there was barely any traffic. The road goes by a set of fishing cabins, set up around a lake, but was extended to lead back to the main road further up ahead. Usually, there's nothing but frogs there. As I drove by, a small family of 6 rats ran straight across the road. This had never happened to me before. My body spasmed and my mind blanketed. I panicked and turned the car straight into a pine tree. It was such a strange feeling. I heard the sound and scream and tried to cover my ears, only to realize I was the one screaming. My oldest daughter managed to call 911. My reaction was far scarier to them than the crash itself. We were fine. I was driving slowly and everyone turned out okay. Even the car was okay, after some light body work. However, my wife insisted I started going to therapy to deal with this terror, once and for all. I couldn't say no. Not again. There aren't many mental health professionals in the nearby area, so the list of available therapists wasn't long. I could go for 2 sessions a week if it wasn't too far away. I was looking for assisted exposure therapy, and truth be told, I was a bit on edge about the whole thing. My wife was the driving force behind this decision, so she pretty much just pointed me where to go. She chose to sign me up for a session with Dr. Jane Bogan. Dr. Jane was excited to see me. She was in her 40s and had this combed-back Elvira-looking hairdo, but without the volume. At first sight, you might mistake her for a medium or a psychic. It wasn't the best first impression, but her credentials checked out. We shook hands, her wrist rattling with jewelry and chains. She insisted I call her Jane. The office was kind of murky. Dark gray wallpaper with a matching carpet, plenty of bookshelves with the desk set up by the corner, and, of course, fancy leather lounge chairs, the kind you can straighten out to lie down in. Her office assistant, Jeremy, offered me coffee and a donut before returning to an adjacent room. Apparently he helped all 4 offices in the building with their scheduling, but Jane was the only one working today. Jeremy was a short, balding man with a tired look. He had some kind of accent, but I couldn't put my finger on what. European, I think. Today, he's all ours, Jane joked. Jeremy didn't laugh. Jane and I had a long talk about my phobia. I told her about the tool shed on top of that greasy hill, and the screeching sounds of the rabid rat, the desperate scratching, trying to make a dent in the front door. I told her about the crash, and how my body just seized up and refused to let me act. Jane was a very active listener, asking follow-up questions and making notes along the way. She nodded, made eye contact, and seemed very attentive. She was good, and just talking openly about my fear was refreshing. At the end of the first session, Jane explained her thoughts to me. Until next time, I'll present a treatment plan, but I can already say, you're a prime candidate for overexposure therapy. Do you mean exposure therapy? I asked. No, this is different. She smiled and touched my hand. Overexposure therapy is slightly different, but far more effective in the long run. It also doesn't require you to actually meet or touch any rats. It can be done right here in the office. Really? I've never heard of it. I'm licensed to perform it, she said and stood up. She pointed out a diploma next to her desk. Right there, underneath the degree from Minnesota State, was a license from the Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy, BBHT. It looked official enough, and I didn't have any reason to distrust her, so I agreed to discuss it with my wife. Of course, it wasn't much of a discussion. I didn't mind trying something new, and my wife was overjoyed to see me progressing. We tried looking up overexposure therapy, but it didn't give us anything. Most links were just explaining how regular exposure therapy works. I didn't like the idea of facing my fear, but with the guidance of Dr. Jane, it felt a bit easier. She was a professional after all. I called her and agreed to the treatment. She explained it would be best to set aside a full day for it. We booked the upcoming Saturday. It wouldn't be cheap, but she guaranteed a breakthrough. I'd wager my reputation on it. She laughed. The next Saturday, I kissed my wife goodbye and left to see Dr. Jane. I was nervous, but seeing my girls waving goodbye as I pulled out of the driveway, that calmed my heart. They were so worried about me. I had to get better. When I got to Dr. Jane's office, she was waiting for me in the parking lot. Jeremy was there as well. Despite it being a Saturday, my car was the only one in the parking lot, making me wonder if Jane lived nearby and walked to work. As I got out of the car, I noticed Jeremy holding a cup of coffee and a donut. We hadn't even stepped inside yet. He didn't blink much. Glad you could make it, Jane said. It's gonna be a long day. Jeremy handed me the coffee and donut, and we entered the office. One of the lounge chairs was set up so I could lie down. I noticed how Jeremy lingered in the room until Jane stared him down. Then, she turned her attention to me. It felt like I was staring into a furnace. Have a seat. I lied down as she dimmed the lights. Close your eyes, and don't be alarmed, she continued. Well, what are you? I didn't have time to say anything else. Jane touched her thumb to my forehead, and my mind was set on fire. That's the only way I can explain the sensation. My mind flared, and there was an intense heat, wave after wave, fanning out from the point on my forehead she touched. Heat, then freezing cold. There was a taste of metal and a smell of burning rubber, like getting a tattoo on my brain. I couldn't open my eyes, and I couldn't feel my hands or feet. It felt like I was sinking into the chair, deeper and deeper. Relax, a disembodied voice demanded. I felt my breathing stopping, my heart slowing. Fire turned to ice. I could have sworn I was dying, but my body didn't respond. I was losing control. Then, my eyes burst open. It felt like breaching the surface after diving too deep. My pulse shot through my body like an automatic rifle. I was shaking, and my eyes teared up. To call it disorienting would be an understatement. I was still in the office, but it was night. I'd arrived at 10 in the morning. Now, it was close to midnight. Jane was gone. Jeremy, too. My pockets were empty. I called out, but there was no response. I was alone. I opened the office door and stepped out of the parking lot, only to realize I was actually far from alone. There was Jeremy. His eyes were wide open and seemed larger than usual. The pupils were different sizes. His mouth was open, like a panting dog, revealing a tongue long enough to reach his belly button. He was completely naked and covered in deep, bloodless cuts. He stood in the middle of the parking lot under the single working light post. He seemed taller, like stretched soft plastic. We locked eyes. His mouth curled into a smile, never blinking, never closing his mouth. And now, he was sprinting towards me with complete abandon. Naked feet slapped against the concrete. He almost tripped as he stumbled across the curb. I slammed the door shut. Jeremy's entire body weight slammed against the door with a deep splat. The door buckled, but held. Jeremy was screaming. It was a pained, primal shriek, like someone being set on fire. All-enveloping pain, expressed in a rasping and dry voice. I hurried back into the office. One of the bookshelves looked loose, so with enough force I'd be able to tip it. I had to try. The bookshelf itself wasn't heavy, but the over 100 books on psychology held it down. I summoned all my strength and tipped the whole thing in front of the door. I sat down, back to the bookshelf. I noticed I was screaming too, yelling at him to stop and leave me alone. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened. I was so disoriented. It seemed like time was standing still. As Jeremy broke through the door leading in from the parking lot, I braced myself. He flung himself against the office door, but the added weight of the bookshelf and myself was enough to keep it shut. "Stop!" I heard myself scream. "Please, just stop!" I scrambled to hold him back, cutting my thumb open on a splinter. I didn't even notice until my hand started slipping from the blood. As I stared across the room, I could see the full moon outside the office window. Slowly, a face appeared on the other side of the glass. Stepping out of the dark, a woman I'd never seen before. Hairless, also with deep cuts across her skin. Eyes wide, pupils differently sized. Her mouth wide open, her long tongue pressed against the glass like a dying eel. "No," I heard myself sigh. "Please, just, no." She nodded as her mouth turned into a sinister smile. Using her arms and face, she started to break herself against the glass. She didn't bleed from the cuts. I didn't know what to do until the glass shattered. I bolted to the left, through the side door into the hallway. I followed the corridor to the right as the office door broke behind me. Jeremy was through. I could hear the two of them panting as they chased me. I saw two options: get out through a window or lock myself in the bathroom. I refused to corner myself, so I chose the window. I smashed it with my elbow and climbed out, feeling cold fingers brush against my neck. It was cold outside and dark. I just ran, hearing the panting behind me. I followed a path into a pine forest, getting scratches from the trees across my face. It's nothing short of a miracle that I didn't trip. I paid no attention to my feet. As the ground turned upwards to a hill, I lost my breath. I knew this hill, and this couldn't be here. It was the same hill where I'd been chased into a tool shed as a kid, and there it was. There was nowhere else for me to go. They were faster, and I had to find cover. This was impossible. I'd done this once before, and now I was doing it again. I ran up the hill, flung the old wooden door open, and shut it behind me. The door had a side bolt, so I locked it. There were no windows, but the entire shed was flimsy at best. I cursed myself. This was just another dead end. For minutes, it was quiet. Maybe they hadn't followed me. Maybe they took a different path. I relaxed my breath, feeling blood return to my fingers and toes. Then, they came. They smashed themselves against the door, They tore at the frail planks. The pained screams exploded and echoed across the hillside. I couldn't hear myself think. Desperate, I looked where to go next, but I was cornered. It can't end like this, I panted. It can't. It won't. Not like this. I cried. I pleaded. There were more of them now. At least 6. One of the planks on the left side broke off, and 5 arms reached for me. Pale arms, with deep bloodless cuts. The moon reflected unblinking eyes and long slithering tongues. Not like this. The slide bolt had lost 2 screws. It was a matter of seconds. No! No! I armed myself with a claw hammer as the door bust open. Jeremy was the first in, but I didn't get the chance to attack. 3 different arms grabbed me, disarmed me, and pushed me onto the floor. Cold, naked flesh pressed against me. Countless eager faces drooled with delight as teeth pierced my neck. Then, I woke up. The clock showed 20 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. I was on the floor of Dr. Jane's office, curled up in a fetal position. There was a cold towel on my head, and Dr. Jane was calmly stroking my shoulder. My head was warm, and a great headache was subsiding. Jeremy was nowhere around. "There we go," she whispered. "You're fine, you're fine." I couldn't speak. I was shaking like a leaf. Jane helped me back up to my seat. "That was the end of your treatment." She smiled. "You're all done." What? What was? I had completely forgotten why I was there in the first place. Jane reached for something. "Hold out your hands," she said. I did as she asked. A second later, a small white mouse was placed in my palms. The confused little thing just sniffed me and stood on its hind legs. I didn't react. In my mind, I was about to be eaten alive just seconds ago. "You seem to be cured." Jane smiled. "Treatment successful. You can give him back now, if you want." I wouldn't mind holding him for a bit. I really didn't. I wanted the little mouse to stay. It was a tiny comfort. A living creature I could feel meant me no harm. "Good," nodded Jane. "So, what what happened?" "You were overexposed," said Jane, filling out some paperwork. "An extreme stress reaction dampens all other reactions." "I don't understand." "Say you have an oven with 4 settings," she continued. 4 being the highest setting. That's where you were, with your fear of rats. Maximum power, strength 4. She handed the paper over to me. It was a bill for the day. "I changed your maximum setting to 10. Suddenly a 4 doesn't seem so bad." "But how?" She sat down across from me and locked her eyes to mine. There was something dark in there. A hint of red. "I'm very good at what I do." She took my hand and turned it over. That's when I noticed the cut along my thumb. I was allowed to keep the white mouse. I bought him a little cage, some toys, and plenty of food. When I got home that night, my wife couldn't believe her eyes. My girls named the mouse Kenny, and he was gently played with late into the night. Much to our Yorkie's dismay, my wife called it a miracle. But I didn't know what to call it. My mind was still in a daze. I found myself thinking back to that day. It wasn't a dream or a vision. It was real. It had to be. Thumbs don't cut themselves on imaginary splinters. Sometimes, I find myself staring into the mirror, seeing my pupils dilate into different sizes. It feels like my tongue has grown longer. Hell, my forehead seemed to have a slight magnetic pull where Dr. Jane touched me. It's a very unusual kind of headache. There was also an incident, just a few days ago, where I cut my finger dicing potatoes. Not a drop of blood came out. I barely even felt it. I can't bring myself to go back to Dr. Jane. If there is even a slight chance she'll put me back on that hill, I won't ever talk to her or see her again. I might have had the fear of rats scared out of me, but it has been replaced by this deep, existential dread of what Dr. Jane could do to me if she wanted to. What has she done to me? And why can't I bleed? For a few years, I've worked as a private contractor. My grandfather taught me to be a woodworker and carpenter. Grandma used to say I could properly use a dowel before I could talk, but I think they might have exaggerated a bit. Still, I love making things with my hands. That passion has given me quite a lot over the years. A family, a home, a steady job, a '68 Dodge Charger. What more can you ask for? That is, until not too long ago, when I got a bit more than I asked for. When the COVID pandemic hit, there were a lot of people who lost their jobs. My firm was pretty much fine, as people needed to fix up their houses to make it through an entire year indoors. There was also a rising interest in custom furniture, so we got a lot of special orders. I felt kind of bad that we were doing so well, so I decided I wanted to do something to give back to the community. So, for those people who lost their jobs, I decided to start a woodworking class. My wife loved the idea. I got to use the wood shop at a local high school after a few short talks with the principal. I put up flyers around town, posted some ads on social media, and asked my daughters to spread the word in their classes. We still made sure to adhere to safety standards, so there could only be 10 people at a time, and we were spread out far and wide. It took me less than a month to put it all together, and sooner than I realized, I was a teacher. It was easier than I thought it would be, and as soon as I started talking about what I love, I was unstoppable. One by one, I asked my students what they wanted to make. Robert, an older man, wanted to make a pool cue. Donna, a stay-at-home mom, wanted to make a patterned rolling pin. Everyone had their own idea. Then, there was Roy. Roy was somewhere in his 40s. He was skinny, had a slight limp, and a face that just screamed that he had been punched a few times too many. He had a surprisingly deep voice with rolling R's, black hair like a wet crow. "So what do you want to make, Roy?" I asked. "Any ideas?" "What do you want?" he asked back. "Me? I'd make He surprised me, but I thought about it. I tried to figure out something that a guy like Roy could make use of. I thought about a baseball bat or something sporty, but he didn't seem like the type. I winged it. "A shoehorn," I said. "What do you think?" "Maybe," he nodded. "A shoehorn. Or maybe a spice rack?" I continued, weighing his reaction. "Paint it something nice, something that'll match your kitchen." "Then I'll make a spice rack," said Roy, rolling the R in rack. That's how our first class started. I went through the tools, and everyone was free to bring their materials over to the shop and make their project. They could also make them at home and come in for feedback. It was all very casual and free form. Most of them were excited, and I had few talks about what tools to use, what to look for, and even what channels to check out online. We started making step-by-step plans to finish our projects in time for our 5th and final session. During all this time, Roy didn't do anything. He didn't make any plans. He didn't make any sketches. He never asked any questions. He just stood there, nodding his head, rolling his R's. Sure, he was going to make a spice rack, he said, but he never had anything to show for it. 5 sessions came and went, and everyone had something to present. Robert finished his pool cue, and Donna made an amazing star pattern for her rolling pin. Roy, on the other hand, had nothing. "Didn't you finish your project?" I asked. "I did," he said. "I just didn't bring it." Again, that rolling R and bring made me shiver, and not in the good way. "We'd love to see it," Robert said. "It's okay if it isn't perfect." "But it is," nodded Roy. "It is perfect." He rolled the R in perfect just a little bit too long. Robert was clearly uncomfortable. Once my first group of students finished, the next batch signed up. A lot of younger folks this time, a majority under 18. And to my surprise, a return student, Roy. While Julian and Greg wanted to make a chessboard and a wall shelf, Roy didn't want to make anything. Instead, he just asked me again, "What do you want made?" This time, I said a ladder, a tool, something practical. Roy agreed. Weeks passed one after another, and the same thing happened. Roy kept showing up empty-handed, while the other students just looked at him funny. Greg made his shelf from solid oak, and Julian made her chessboard from birch. Roy, on the other hand, just listened to my instructions and took notes. He really seemed like he wanted to make something, but he just never did. As I started my third batch of students, Roy came along for the third time. Again, he asked, "What do you want made?" At this point, I was frustrated. "I'd make a tool shed, Roy," I said, "to put all my other projects in." He lit up with a smile and nodded. I could have said a spaceship. He still would have agreed. The other students noticed something was up, and 2 of them didn't come to the second session. 2 more dropped out by the third. By the end of the final session, it was just me, Roy, and 3 people who had nothing to show. They were eager to leave, and I didn't feel like stopping them. Finally, there was only me and Roy left as I cleaned up. As I put away the sign-up sheets, he sat down across from me with a big smile on his face. "I finished it," he said. "Finished what?" "The tool shed." "Right. Is that where you're keeping the spice rack and the ladder?" "Yeah." I laughed, but he didn't. I waited for him to tell me it was a joke, but he was dead serious. He stayed silent, watching me. "You're serious," I said. "You actually made it, didn't you?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Wanna go see?" "I don't think so, Roy. No offense, but I'm not sure we're that close." "Okay," he said. As casually as picking up a pack of gum, he suddenly pointed a gun at me. "I want you to see it. I need the feedback." It was a strange feeling, being so casually threatened. You don't realize the danger at first. Mortality is just this fleeting abstract concept until you stare down the barrel of a loaded gun. Suddenly, you remember that you can die. We took my '68 Charger. Roy was slightly larger than I thought, and he had to lean back the passenger seat to fit his legs. Even without pointing the gun at me, I could almost feel it, like a heat radiating towards me. Roy seemed overall pretty calm about the whole thing, but my mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? Ram the car into a tree? I couldn't decide, and before I knew it, we'd been on the road for over an hour. Roy pointed at an exit and told me to follow a dirt road. I could feel my phone buzzing like crazy. My family was getting worried. He still hadn't asked me to turn it off. Maybe they could track me. The road just seemed to go further and further downward. I had to crawl at a slow pace just to spare the suspension. After about 20 minutes, there were more roots and boulders than actual road. The phone stopped buzzing. We were off the grid. I parked the car and stepped out at Roy's instruction. Using a small flashlight, he showed me the way forward. We were deep in the forest, but I could barely hear a single bird. A few chickadees at most. "My sister gets me the materials. She's very resourceful." Every rolling R seemed to be on the edge of turning into a growl. I peeked behind me, only to see the gun pointed straight at me. "Eyes forward," he said. "I want your honest first impression." I could have sworn his eyes were red. At first, I didn't notice the clearing in the woods. There was just a strange metallic smell in the air, strong enough for me to taste it. Still, no birds, no insects. just a breeze sweeping through the trees. "There," said Roy. "My tool shed." The flashlight fell upon something. It looked nothing like a tool shed. In many ways, it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Something started boiling up inside of me. Is that's not wood?" "No," said Roy. "It isn't." I had to look away, but I felt the gun push me forward. "Look!" I looked. Bones, sinew, muscle, and cartilage. A big, grotesque hollow square. Every single detail was a nightmare in itself. The skin draped over the door was the last straw for me, and I fell to my knees, covering my face with my hands. Again, the cold steel of a gun pushed against me. "I need you to look at 2 more things." Oh God. The spice rack. The ladder. Stepping into that tool shed was like walking into hell. Most of the materials were dry, and there wasn't a single insect anywhere near. With nothing but Roy's flashlight, I only caught a quick glimpse of the interior. I tried looking away, but the presence of that gun was enough to force my eyes forward. "There, the spice rack," he said. "Please." I saw rows of bony fingers, arranged like they were holding cups. Femurs arranged like a ladder. I blinked and turned around to plead for my sanity. Roy wasn't himself anymore. He was at least a foot taller, and his hair had grown longer. He smiled with anticipation, his eyes reflecting a clear shade of red. Small white fragments poked out of his hairline, like pin feathers of a bird or sharp nails. His fingers seemed longer. "You're useless," he growled, rolling his tongue. "This was a mistake." I had to think of something, say something, anything. "The shoehorn," I yelled. "What shoehorn?" "The first day, I said a shoehorn or a spice rack. Did you ever make the shoehorn?" "I could." Then show me." In an instant, he grabbed my arm, pushed me to the ground, and placed his knee on my back. He was going to break my arm. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice. He was going to make a shoehorn out of my shoulder blade. "Wood! You need to make it out of wood," I pleaded. "That's the rule." "I make the rules," he grinned. You're so used to a single material. A true craftsman needs to be able to work a variety of materials. Birch, pine, oak, willow, all kinds. I can make things you can only dream of." He bent my arm further, like he was trying to snap a carrot. "Then do it. Make one. Pine wood. There's plenty of it to go around." He stopped. With a sigh, he let go and stepped off of me. "Fine," he moaned. "Wait here." He pushed me into the shed and closed the door. I fell to the floor in complete darkness. It was like a nest, covered in branches, mud, and grass. In fact, it smelled more like mud and grass than anything else. I couldn't help but wonder how something so grotesque could be almost completely without smell. It should have stunk like hell in here, but it didn't. A faint whiff of iron. That was it. The first thing I tried was my phone, but it was no help. There was no reception, and the light did nothing but bring my nightmares to life. I couldn't stand to see my surroundings, but filling the walls blindly didn't help either. I couldn't see any weak spots, but I couldn't feel any either. I was stuck. The door was locked. I don't even know how, but I couldn't budge it. The entire shed was sturdy, using some sort of pine dug into the ground as support. I tried feeling my way out into the dark, but all it did was give me an inner picture of what I was actually standing in. After a while, it got so dark that I didn't know if I was closing my eyes or not. I lost track of the door. It all just felt wrong. How can you differentiate a door from a wall when all you see and feel is dry meat and bone? I tried everything, lifting, wedging, leverage, but got nothing. The shed wouldn't budge. It felt like I struggled for an eternity, but it had probably just been an hour. Light or no light, I couldn't get out. My phone just sat there in my hands, useless. I felt it in my chest, that black sinking anxiety, the cold, that feeling when you think you're about to die. I must have sat there, frozen, for hours. I snapped to attention when I heard a sound outside. It was smaller, careful, tiny steps. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out with a dry voice. And it was a boy, just some boy in the middle of nowhere. And all he had to say was, "And?" I pushed the confusion away, feeling a hope light up. Hey kid," I smiled. "You, out there, can you open the door?" And then I paused to think, what the hell was this? And then we can go away. Do you want ice cream? We can get that. We can get whatever you want. Pizza? And then I was about to explode on this kid. He had this infuriating tone like he was mocking me. Then, suddenly, the door opened. He had the same dark hair as Roy, but was no more than 10 or 13 years old. The same red eyes, the same pale complexion. He was dragging some sort of blue plastic garbage bag. And then, he asked again, I don't know what you want." I looked around. The coast was clear. I couldn't leave him there. I tried picking him up, but he just recoiled. He shook his head and then stepped away. "And then?" he said. "And then, we have to go," I whispered. "Come on." "And then?" he said matter-of-factly. He stepped inside the shed and closed the door. I just started running. My car wasn't far off, and I was far quicker on the way back than I'd been getting there. The keys were still in the ignition. The charger seemed just as eager to get me out of those woods as I'd been getting out of that shed. Together we turned around and drove like maniacs back to the main road. I didn't care about the boulders, roots, vines, or bushes. I had to go, and I had to go now. With the beaten suspension, we managed to get to the main road. I stepped on the gas. I'd rather die in a car crash than anywhere near Roy and his creations. What happened next was a blur. I was pulled over by a highway patrol, who noticed I was in shock. I gave a statement about the kidnapping. Trying to explain what I'd seen just made the deputy shake his head. Maybe he didn't believe me, or maybe he'd heard this before. Either way, he made very few notes, barely took my name. I've since shut down that class, and I'm being treated for a stress disorder. I get these stomach cramps, and I have to sleep with the lights on. I have to see that I'm out of that hellhole with my own eyes. When the light disappears, I can't be sure anymore. I'm going to see a therapist about it soon enough. I've gotten a few recommendations. Not sure I like the idea of overexposure therapy, but whatever works. I haven't heard anything about an investigation, but there have been no reports of murders nearby. Not to the extent that you could build a shed out of the remains or a spice rack or a ladder. Wherever Roy got his materials, it must have been from somewhere else. Maybe that kid knew. I think about him a lot. I get the feeling that he wasn't there to rescue me, so much as just to put away that plastic bag of his. But Roy is still out there. That I'm certain of. After all, he sent me a shoehorn in the mail a few weeks ago. At least, the damn thing was made out of solid pine. I was staying at a hotel in Chicago during a business trip, and I was going to stay for the whole weekend. It was an older hotel, one that still used small keys rather than key cards to enter the rooms. I didn't mind it. It seemed nice to get away from the onslaught of technology. When I checked into the hotel, it was packed full. A nasty storm had struck, stranding many tourists and canceling flights. No more rooms were available, and many people were being turned away because of the lack of availability. When I approached the front desk to check in, I noticed that all the keys on the rooms on the 8th floor were still on the wall. Not a single key was missing. It seemed odd that an entire floor would be vacant when so many people were clamoring to check in and get to their rooms. I could see the clerk was stressed out and was ready to just give up and go home, so I tried to lighten the mood. Kind of weird, isn't it? What is? The clerk asked. How everyone on the 8th floor is missing. The clerk gave me an odd look and his face paled. What do you know about the 8th floor? He replied in a serious tone. Oh, nothing, I answered honestly, a little embarrassed that my attempt to lighten the mood backfired. I just noticed that all the keys on the 8th floor are still behind the desk. The clerk blushed a little and tried to laugh it off. Oh, yeah, I see now. He went back to checking me in and handed me the key to my room on the 9th floor. Enjoy your stay. I will, thanks. I awkwardly accepted the key and grabbed my bag, heading for the elevator. Just like the lobby, the elevator was also packed. It was difficult to stand next to so many strangers so close by, let alone enter and exit the small car. I struggled to reach and press the button for the 9th floor, but I managed to see over the crowd of people and reach the button panel. It was then that I noticed that the button seemed to be missing a floor number, 8. That's funny, I thought out loud. I wonder why there's no button for the 8th floor. But no one in the elevator reacted. They either didn't care or they were too preoccupied and didn't hear me. Once I finally got to my floor and checked into my room, I took a moment to relax and unwind on the bed. I had to give a presentation tomorrow and I needed to be alert. I decided to go to bed early that night and to practice my speech a few times to make sure I sounded confident. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror as I practiced my sales pitch a few times. A strange groaning sound from the room beneath me got my attention. It sounded like there was a man in pain or upset about something. I ignored it and continued to practice my speech. The groaning from the lower floor continued on, getting louder and louder by the minute. Angrily, I stomped on the floor as hard as I could and shouted out, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" There was no response. The groaning stopped. Satisfied that the man realized he was making too much noise, I continued to practice my speech. Just as I finished the first half of my speech, the groaning began again. But this time, it was much louder and angry. If this was going to go on all night, there was no way I'd be prepared for my presentation tomorrow. I knocked on my neighbor's door and was greeted with a grumpy response from a young woman and her new husband. "Excuse me," I politely tried to engage in conversation. "Do you hear that noise in the room below us?" "No." The woman sounded more confused than grouchy now. "We haven't heard anything until you pounded on our door." "Oh, I'm sorry." I apologized, once again feeling embarrassed. "Must be the pipes or something then." I tried to think of a possible alternate explanation so I didn't sound like a crazy person. "Well, I'll call management then. Sorry about that. You guys have a good night." The couple shut the door and locked it. I returned to my room where the groaning noise continued. I picked up the phone on the small table next to the bed and called the front desk to complain about the noise. When I mentioned that it seemed to be coming from the room beneath me, a room on the 8th floor, the woman who answered the phone suddenly got quiet. "Sir, there is no one checked in that room. It must be someone on the 9th floor." "No," I tried to sound confident. "It's not coming from the walls, it's coming from the floor." "Well," the woman sounded rattled, and I could sense that she was trying to think of an explanation just to get me to hang up. "I'll call the maintenance crew. It's probably a leaky pipe or a problem with the heating ducts." "Yeah, thanks." I hung up the phone, not believing her for an instant. The groaning was growing louder and angrier by the minute. I put my hands to my ears and tried to block out the noise, but it wasn't enough. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower and the sink full blast, hoping the running water would drown the noise and at least help me a little bit. I sat on the bathroom floor, trying to think of a way to get some sleep, but I didn't have any other options. All the rooms were full. I couldn't request a new room, and there was no way any other hotel would have any vacancies during the storm. Suddenly, the pipes on the shower began rattling violently. The shaking was so strong that it caused the shower to sputter as it continued to run. The sound was like thunder inside the walls and the thunder outside the hotel, as well as the pounding rain. Sounded like there was a freight train barreling down the tracks right at me. I left my room, grabbing my keys and my phone. I made my way to the elevator so I could lodge a complaint in the lobby. As soon as I stepped inside the elevator, I remembered that the 8th floor couldn't be accessed. The number was not an option. And I remembered that all the keys on the 8th floor were still behind the desk at the lobby. How could anyone check into a room on the 8th floor? Curious, I exited the elevator and made my way for the stairs. I walked down the stairwell from the 9th floor and directly onto the 7th. That's impossible, I told myself. I walked back up the stairs and double-checked the floor numbers. Sure enough, just like the elevator, there was no number 8. I walked up and down the staircase a few times, trying to figure out what was going on, when I noticed a small imperfection in the wall next to the doorway that led onto the 7th floor. I checked and realized that it was a gap. The gap was between a hidden door and its frame. Using my fingertips, I pried the door open and found a small staircase leading back up one flight, up to the otherwise non-existent 8th floor. It was dark and dusty, like no one had used this passageway in years. I used the screen on my phone to light my way as I made my way up the secret staircase. There was another door at the top of the stairs. It wasn't sealed away or hidden. It was easily accessible. The door was number 8. Opening the door, I found myself on the 8th floor and alone. I could just feel it. There was no one else on the floor with me. It was dark in the long hallway. Not even the exit signs were lit up. I continued to use my phone as I walked down the hallway, checking each door as I passed. They were all locked. That is, except for one door. The unlocked door was for the room directly beneath mine. I knocked once, just to make sure no one was secretly checked into the room, but no one replied. I opened the door, still trying to figure out why this door was unlocked, and found myself standing in a room that mirrored my own perfectly. The lights didn't work. I tried the switch a few times, but there was no power on this floor. "Hello?" I called out into the room. Is anyone in here?" Still, no response. I went over to the phone and picked it up, but the line was dead. The amount of dust and cobwebs told me that no one was in this room and no one had been in here for quite some time, but I felt compelled to look around. I opened the door to the bathroom and was taken aback by what I saw in the room. There was a bathtub in the room, unlike mine which had a shower, and the tub was full of water. The water was at the top of the tub, threatening to spill over at any moment. I stepped closer, still using my phone to light the way, when I noticed a dark figure in the tub. It looked like a man, a dead man. Shining my phone over the tub, I stared down into the still water, as if in a trance, trying to look at the man's dead face. As my senses slowly came back to me, the man's eyes opened and he looked directly at me. I fell back on the floor, dropping my phone and losing my light. A splashing sound came from the tub and I could feel the water spilling onto the floor, soaking into my clothes. The sound of heavy, wet footsteps exited the tub. The second footstep was all the motivation I needed to get up and run. I bolted from the room, not caring about my phone or who the man was and ran down the hall back to the door from whence I entered. I ran down the stairs, all the way down into the lobby, and didn't stop until I collided with the desk. Breathlessly, I tried to tell the clerk what I had seen and that we needed to call the police. The clerk, who looked scared, not so much as me because there was a dead body in the hotel, but more like he was afraid of getting fired, escorted me to the manager's office behind the desk. "Sir," the clerk tried to sound calm and reassuring. "What did you see exactly?" I told him what I had seen and what I had heard. I showed him the wet spots on my clothes where the tub's water splashed on me. I didn't care if I got arrested for trespassing or causing a disturbance. I had to tell someone what happened. The clerk listened intently to my story, not blinking, not looking away. When I finished, he got up and walked over to a large file cabinet. He pulled open an unmarked drawer and began thumbing through an extensive collection of files. Pulling a file from the drawer, he opened it up and pulled out a very old newspaper article. "Is this the man you saw?" he asked and handed me the article. I looked at the clipping and felt my stomach drop. It was him. That was the man. The clerk sat down across from me and smiled a little. "You're not the first to see him." That was not the reaction I was expecting. "Read the article. It should help clear things up for you." The article told the story of a man who had gone away on business and returned home to discover that his pregnant wife had been cheating on him and that the baby wasn't his. Heartbroken and betrayed, the man checked himself into the hotel and never left his room. He was heard crying and wailing in heartbreak for 3 days before he finally stopped. When the maid entered his room to clean, she found his body in the bathtub. He had taken his own life, drowning himself after ingesting many sleeping pills. Is this why you don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor? Because of him?" I asked, feeling more at ease knowing that I wasn't crazy. "No," the clerk admitted. "He's only one of the reasons we don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor." What? What do you mean?" The clerk just smiled again. "You see that filing cabinet?" "Yeah." "And that unmarked drawer at the bottom?" "Yeah," I answered again. "What of it?" "That drawer contains every reason we don't let anyone check in on the 8th floor. Ever since this hotel opened in 1873, we've had people die in very unusual ways, always on the 8th floor." "That's strange," I commented, feeling a little queasy. What's stranger is the fact that no two deaths were the same, and no two deaths ever took place in the same room. Each room on the 8th floor has housed a tragic death, and each room has been reportedly haunted by the dead. That sent a shiver up my spine. "What? How? Are you telling me the 8th floor is cursed? Anyone who checks into a room is going to die or be haunted?" The clerk bowed his head. "It's not just the rooms that have seen death. Maintenance workers have died attempting simple repairs. One man was electrocuted trying to fix the lights. Another fell down the elevator shaft to his death. A maid was found dead, hanging by her neck at the end of the hallway." I sat in transfixed fear at the story the clerk had just told me, and I didn't want to believe it. "But shouldn't we call the police? I saw a body." "Everyone does," the clerk explained. "Even the police have seen the bodies, but have never been able to explain the situations." I didn't know what to do. It was late. I was exhausted and didn't want to cause any more disturbances. Reluctantly, I returned to my room. I took the elevator and held my breath as the car passed the sealed-off 8th floor. As I approached my room, I saw something wet on the floor outside my door. It was my phone. I happened upon the book at a kiosk in my town's annual witchcraft festival. The seller, a young red-haired woman, told me it was known as the Book of Memories. If you wrote down a recollection on one of its many blank pages and closed the book shut, it would vanish from your memories forever, or those of others. Only $14.99. This was a strange way to sell a diary, I thought, but the cover was remarkable, pitch black with an embossed rune I had never seen before. Despite the bogus backstory, I was intrigued, transfixed by its design. Even if I never put it to use, it would fit nicely with my ever-growing collection of odd supernatural relics, most of which were just strange craft items from Etsy. Just as I was about to hand over my debit card, the woman spoke. "It can be yours for free, depending on your answer to this question. Do you have a troubled past?" I looked at her, utterly confused. Yeah, but who doesn't? She made eye contact for an uncomfortable period of time, and then smiled, handing me the book. Her behavior was very strange, but I was more than happy to not spend any money. As such, I thanked her and went about my day. Upon coming home that night and venturing up to my bedroom, I threw the book beside my pillow and grabbed a head of lettuce from the mini fridge to feed my pet tortoise, Harold. He was off in the corner, chewing up one of my stuffed animals, as he so often did when famished. I pulled the plush aside and broke off some greenery to placate his hunger. He was pleased. I sat on the bed and picked up my new collectible. I thought for a moment about the seller's words and decided to prove her wrong, at least to myself, if for no other reason than to have a good laugh at her expense. I grabbed the nearest pen and jotted down Harold's name in one of its many folds. I then shut the book and waited. I looked over at Harold, eating his lettuce. I was not startled by his presence, knowing exactly who he was and remembering every facet of his life. My parents gifted him to me as a youngling before their untimely passing. I was very close with them, so the time immediately following their funeral was truly trying. Harold was there for me. I fell in love with that stupid green face of his. He kept me company when I was at my worst and provided a shell for me to cry on. You could say that he saved me in a way, a torch that guided me through dark times. But Harold was no youngling anymore. His surface area took up a decent portion of floor space, similar in size to a large tire. I watched as a bit of lettuce fell from his mouth and then chuckled. Silly hair. In saying this, something happened. I choked on my words. I still knew my pet tortoise, but I could not for the life of me think of his name. I panicked, but looked over at the herb garden on the windowsill, a place for his treats to grow in the sun. Above it was a sign I'd made. Harold's Garden. The name was completely new to me. I had no memory of ever coming up with it. The book didn't delete him from my memory, only his name. But it actually worked. Was the woman at the festival a real witch? This was a shocking revelation. I now had the power to erase any of my memories with the flick of a pen, or those of others. I remembered the woman's words. She specifically said it could erase my memories, or those of others. But how could I do the latter? I scoured the book for clues and came across a page at its end with a different format than the blank ones before it. Person. Memory. I thought for a moment, excited. An idea came to mind that I quickly acted on. After turning on my TV and flipping over to the news channel, I put my theory to the test. In the top box, I wrote the anchor's name. In the bottom, the memory of how to speak. Cruel, yes, but I desperately needed to know, and half expected it wouldn't work. Upon closing the book and opening it again, The ink vanished. I patiently waited for a result. In a matter of moments, the anchor stopped talking and bore a look of intense confusion. He continued to open his mouth, but no words came out. Eventually, the footage was cut short due to technical difficulties. It actually fucking worked. This was my chance. I could now do what I always dreamed of doing, and I wasn't going to wait another second to put my plan in motion. The door to his house was locked, but it was easy enough to bust open. There he was, a pitiful excuse for a man, relaxing in front of his TV, as if he had the right to do so. Surprised by my arrival, he questioned me. Who are you? He stood up and began walking to my position. I was prepared for this, having already written in the book. After shutting it, his legs gave out, as he completely forgot how to walk. He now had the motor skills of a toddler and was helpless to my attack. He cried out, but this was futile. Another quick bend of the book's binding kept him from ever speaking again. Now, he could only listen. How does it feel, Robert, being so helpless and fearing what might come next? He looked up at me, the face of a scared boy painted on an old man. Good. That's how my parents felt when you crashed into their car and drove away. The highway was empty that night. You were the only one who could help. If you had just called someone, they might have lived. I never even had the chance to say goodbye. He tried swinging at me with his arms, but another scribbling in the book put a stop to that. You don't deserve to get away with it. There wasn't enough evidence in my favor, but I knew it was you. I was there. I saw your face when you walked up to the wreckage. I screamed out for you to help us, but you drove off anyway. A frightened child in a man's body. You probably didn't expect I would survive. His mangled form shook in an attempt to move, with what little memory of this action he had left. It was no use. Now, you will suffer, just as I have over the years, forced to live without them. Goodbye, Robert. You won't be missed. With one final closing of the magical tome, I erased his ability to breathe. I then left, satisfied with the mission accomplished. I had already collected the names of his neighbors, so it was easy enough to erase any memory of me ever being in the area. I was sure I wouldn't be caught. After all was said and done, I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in years. There was only one thing left to do. I drove to the local cemetery, strolled through the headstones, and stopped at my parents' grave. I sat there for a good long while, not yet ready to say goodbye. Mom, Dad, I did it. I took care of him, just like I always said I would. A steady stream of tears trickled down my cheeks. It's over now. You can finally rest. I opened the book one last time. I was going to erase them from my memory, once and for all. It was the only way I could ever truly be at peace. I miss you terribly. Things have been pretty dicey here without you, but Harold and I have been getting by as best we can. If I could change things, I would take your place in a heartbeat. But I can't, and that's why I have to do this. The pain is too much to bear. There was now a flood of tears wetting my face. I never had the chance to say it before, so I will now. Goodbye. I love you both so much. Before I could jot down the appropriate words, a cross-section of space opened up in front of me. An oval-shaped portal of swirling energy, from which a woman stepped out. The vortex vanished, and as she pried the book from my hands, knocking me back in the process. It was the seller from the kiosk at the festival, the one who gave me the book. She opened it up and stroked the pages in a meditative trance, all while licking her lips. With a look of pure satisfaction, she opened her eyes and turned to me, frozen in fear on the ground. With every memory I acquire, my demons feed from the darkness within. The sadness and spite with which you acted, the vengeance. These will do nicely. She took a single step in my direction. My heart pounded. Who would have thought? A witch living among mortals. I was lucky to sense your presence and act when I did. My darlings and I were starving. I digested her initial statement and bore a look of shock. Witch? You think I'm a witch? She cackled. Of course you are, child. You would not have been able to use the book otherwise. Did your parents never tell you? I slowly shook my head, still fearful. Stranger still, it's unfortunate you'll never be able to explore your latent abilities. In order to capture the memories you've collected, I must seal them with your blood. We locked eyes. She pondered a brief moment before speaking again. But first, let's see what other repressions we can dredge to the surface. With great precision, her hands moved in a circular motion, a fantastic glow pouring from her fingertips. She drew an intricate design in the air, the same one from the book's cover. She finished by flicking it over to me. I tried to run, but the rune flew at a velocity my legs couldn't hope to match. Its glow enveloped me. I could no longer see anything else. Then, it dissipated, revealing my new surroundings. The woman had inflicted me with a visual hallucination. At the time, it felt all too real. My parents, they were alive. We were sitting at the dinner table in my childhood home. The food was delicious, the company even better. We talked and ate for a long while, for a time frame that could never have been long enough. I was happy, but then the thread was pulled, undoing the charade. The expression on my parents' faces changed abruptly from smiling to stoic. They stared directly at me, piercing my soul with empty eyes. My father spoke first. Why did you live? My heart fell back in my chest. I couldn't respond. My mother chimed in and broke the silence. Why didn't you save us? Before I can even hope to form a reply, they stood up from the table and walked around to my sides. They then lunged at me, to which I winced and took cover beneath the haphazard safety of my own arms. There was no attack. I unraveled myself and was greeted by a new environment. I was back at the cemetery, but not in my own time. It was another memory, one I would have rather died before reliving. The funeral was just as I remembered. In the particular portion I was experiencing, I had asked the guests and other associated parties to leave. I wanted some alone time with my parents. Standing between the caskets, the sentiments I had rehearsed to myself earlier in the day escaped me, leaving me with only tears that quickly formed a puddle on the ground below. I couldn't bear their sight any longer. The mortician did a wonderful job of hiding the wounds, but no amount of makeup could hide the feeling that resonated from their corpses. I stepped away to gather the other guests, ready to lower my family into the earth. This is when the memory diverted its course. Hearing a rustling behind me, I turned back to the coffins on display at the edge of the cemetery. The guests had magically returned, and were now standing as still as ever, staring me down with sullen faces. My parents had arisen from their caskets and were standing at the front of the crowd with blackened eyes. They all moved towards me. I tried to escape, but they were always there. No matter where I pointed myself to run, they quickly surrounded me and closed in. I screamed. The scene melted away and I was back in my own time, standing opposite the mysterious woman. Perfect. That fear and anguish you feel. Such a wonderful taste. My darlings and I will feast for a whole year. She licked her lips some more. Now, the fun part. It's time to steal your memories away forever. You must perish. A wicked smile danced across her face. I trembled as she reached her arms out to attack. That's when the most peculiar thing happened. Another tear in space opened up directly in front of me. Harold trotted out from the void. He extended his neck and opened his mouth, out from which a green blast was expelled. The woman barely had time to dodge the blow. Her smile was now replaced with a look of surprise. You have a familiar? She adjusted herself and sent a glowing, black bolt of lightning at Harold. He retreated into his shell and spun in the same place on the ground, deflecting the attack. He came back out and immediately craned his neck back to see me. I can't explain it, but I swear he was making sure I was okay. It was this feeling that washed over me. In that moment, I felt safe for the first time since my parents died, protected by a warm, loving energy. Harold turned back to face the sorceress. He awkwardly galloped toward her. From his mouth, he shot an expansive blast of green light, filling my entire field of view. I didn't cover my eyes in reaction to its brightness. It was somehow soothing to look at. I was captivated by its blow. When it made contact, it shrunk to outline the woman's form. Her shape writhed within before the light finally faded, revealing only a skeletal structure that disintegrated to ash and fell to the earth below. I directed my attention to Harold. He was back in his shell. Was he okay? Had he exerted too much energy? I rushed over, panicked. I had never seen him so still, even when he slept. I didn't know what else to do, so I just laid my head on him while tears rolled down my sides. Please, Harold, don't disappear like Mom and Dad did. You're all I have left. I still need you. There was no movement. I can't do this without you. You can't leave, okay? Do you hear me in there? Come back! Harold's limbs and head slowly slid out of the crevices of his shell. He nuzzled up to me with what little strength he had left, clearly exhausted. I let out a shriek of joy and hugged that stupid green face of his. The nightmare was over. We could finally go home and rest. I'm not sure if the book survived the blast, but that doesn't matter to me anymore. The whole ordeal taught me to never be tempted by the forces of dark magic ever again. I felt it swimming in my veins, flourishing throughout my entire body. I became powerless to its control. I never want to feel that again. As far as I'm concerned, the book can rot in the cemetery with the woman's remains. Despite my age, I'm still a child with many faults to be learned from. But now, I have someone looking out for me. My parents saw to it that I would always be taken care of, no matter what happened to them. Harold is my familiar, but more than that, he is my closest friend. Whatever the world has in store for us, he will be by my side. And that thought comforts me. I will never have to feel alone, ever again. I stared down at the D20, tears welling in my eyes. 20. The fourth one I'd rolled. Ishan and Kayla stared at me. Their eyes were wide, filled with fear. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't. Saying it would make it real. And I couldn't. It could just be a coincidence. Kayla cut in. Yeah, just last week I got 2 8s in a row, Ishan said with a nervous laugh. But we all knew what was really happening. I'd gotten lucky. And in this town, getting lucky means you're going to die. Corey Eisenberg was a physics major who lived in an off-campus apartment just about a block away from us. Last year, only weeks from graduating, he died in an accident. His death could have been plucked right out of a Final Destination movie. On a bright Monday morning in April, he took the elevator downstairs. Unbeknownst to him, a rat had chewed through the elevator cable that night. As soon as he stepped inside, it would snap. That's not even what killed him though. Not even close. He only lived on the 2nd floor. The impact wasn't all that bad. In fact, he was able to press the help button, call the fire department, and calmly tell them that he needed rescue. They dispatched someone, and everything seemed like it would be fine. But, apparently, on the way down, the cable whipped around inside the shaft and got wrapped around a pipe. When the firemen got there, a rather heavy-set one stepped on top of the elevator. It rocked back and forth, pulling the cable taut. It started spraying water. Now, I know what you're thinking. Water meets a live wire, and crack, he's gone. But no, the electrical wiring was well insulated. What happened was that, at that very moment, the fireman started axing through the top of the elevator, and his axe got stuck. But he'd made a hole, and the water pouring from the pipe dislodged by the elevator cable and chewed by the rat began to leak into the elevator. Drip, drip, drip. The fireman tried to retrieve the axe, but it was completely stuck. One of the firewomen tried to pry the ceiling off the elevator, but it was sealed very, very well. In fact, the whole thing was sealed extremely well. So well, none of the water leaking in could leak out. Corey Eisenberg drowned to death inside an elevator. His death came at the end of an incredible stroke of good luck. I remember reading the headlines in the university paper, how he'd won 10 grand playing the slots in Atlantic City. There were other things too, like the time he ran into a tech CEO at Starbucks and ended up getting a job offer. Never would have been there at the right time if his shower hadn't broken earlier that morning. But his good luck wasn't always so obvious. It started small, very small, like the balance in his checking account being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or breaking the wishbone of a chicken exactly in 2, or the random number generator in a line of code popping out 3 100s in a row, or rolling a die and getting a natural 20 every time. I stared at my reflection. My phone read 2 a.m. in big fat letters, but I couldn't sleep. Corey's death pounded through my mind. His look of terror as the water rose, slamming his fist against the wall of the elevator, screaming for the help that was right on the other side. But he didn't have a chance. Fate, luck, chance, whatever you call it, had already marked him to die. Is that what's going to happen to me? Corey wasn't the only one. There were several other bizarre deaths like this one spanning across a few decades. In the 90s, Lita Montgomery burned to death after tripping over a jack-o'-lantern. She had tripled her wealth at the horse races a week before. In the 2000s, Jen Lu was attacked by a rabid squirrel while on a hike with her family. She just inherited the entire family business after her brother announced he'd be moving to England with his fiancée, who he had met in a chance meeting. But they might all just be tall tales. None of these details were public. They were passed down from the townspeople, from generation to generation. Even with Corey, from news articles I knew he'd died, and that he'd won at the slots. But all the other stuff about wishbones and code was hearsay. Even the details of him drowning in the elevator weren't public. As Sean told me that, I shook my head and turned the water on. splashed some water on my face. It's just a ghost story, I thought, rubbing the water on my face. And I'm going to be 20 next month. Aren't I a little too old for ghost stories? I reached for the towel to dry my face. My arm whacked against my phone. It fell onto the tile with a sickening crack. "Damn it," I shouted, diving for it. I snatched it off the floor, praying the screen wasn't cracked. My heart stopped. The screen was cracked, but it was cracked perfectly. One solid line in the glass, running vertically from the top to the bottom, not a single split or fracture. Cold sweat broke out on my arms. I set the phone down, my hand shaking. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know if I have months or years or just days. I don't know if the legend in my town is just a tall tale, snowballing with each generation, as it's told around smoldering campfires on cold autumn nights. But I don't like my chances. I was a bloody mess. After the 12-car pileup on the freeway, it was a miracle I was even conscious, albeit just barely. There was only one hospital within a 30-mile radius, so all of us were sent there, some via ambulance, others by helicopter. Overwhelmed with the influx of patients, the staff scattered us all over. I was in a bed normally reserved for the lesser injured out in the foyer, as were some of the others involved in the crash. We were separated only by thin curtains, as surgical teams struggled to keep us breathing. If I'm being honest, at the time, I couldn't even remember my own name, let alone what had happened. It all felt so surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake from. "We're losing her!" Those were the first 3 words I comprehended since arriving at the hospital. They came from a doctor operating on a young girl in the bed to my left. Through blurred vision and a small gap in the curtains, I could just make out her features. She was maybe 6 years old with long blonde hair, bloodied and in critical condition. She looked so familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. As I stared, it came to me. My daughter. Yes, my daughter. She looks just like her. That was it. She reminded me of my daughter Leslie. I smiled, but then remembered the last time I saw her. It was in the casket, as she and my wife were both lowered into the earth, victims of a car accident themselves. Oh no, did I cause this? Was I trying to end myself? As the pieces were coming back to me, I remembered the accident, though I couldn't quite place how it all started. Still, it posed the question. Did I do this to be with them? Did I want to go the same way they did? No, that can't be. I would never purposely harm others. Unless I was intoxicated. I could now taste it, the faint leftover residue of alcohol on my tongue. Oh God, no, please no. What have I done? Just then, the sound of a flatline rang through the hospital. It was her, the young girl. She was dying. A slew of doctors rushed over, including some of my own. There were chest compressions, the kiss of life, and a few shocks from the paddles. But it was no use. I watched in horror as her head tilted to face me, lifeless and cold. Something happened when I saw this girl die, something I can't quite explain. Whether it was a result of my trauma or the medicine I was administered, I can't be sure. I only knew that I cracked. Leslie, no! My little girl! Please, no! You have to save her! My heart broke down, and my sanity along with it. All I could see was Leslie, lying on a stretcher on her way to the ER, lying on that slab in the morgue, and then finally, lying in her coffin at the funeral. Some staff ran over and held me down as soon as I stood up, in an attempt to run to the girl's aid. They were about to inject me with the sedative, but it was too late. I was in pretty bad shape, just barely hanging on. The sudden burst of movement did me in once and for all, and my flatline was the next sound echoing through the halls. My time was up, and that was that. Fade to black, lights out. It was all over. At least, I could finally see my family again. Little did I know, things would not be that simple. It was instantaneous. There was no tunnel and no light at the end of it. No portal to walk through or pearly white gates to enter. I simply opened my eyes and I was there. Where exactly? I couldn't be sure at the time. It looked like an ordinary room, covered from corner to corner in a lavish white overlay. It wasn't what I would call vast, but it was certainly large. Approximately an acre of coverage, if my depth perception could be trusted. After a moment or so, a man appeared before me, late 50s maybe, gray hair, gray mustache, turn-of-the-century attire. I took a step back, startled by his sudden arrival. Please, don't be frightened. We never really could get the hang of subtle entrances. Sorry about that. I remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Well, I'm sure you have your questions. Fire away. He was right. I did. Where are we? Who are you? He smiled. Yes, the usual quarries. This, my dear friend, this is heaven, and I am an angel, here to transition you through the process. Process? I asked. Yes, the process of death. It was coming back to me, the accident, the hospital, and that poor little girl. So, I guess I didn't make it. He bore a look of concern. I'm sorry to say, no, you didn't. But please, if you'll accompany me on this little tour, I can show you to your room. You may have died, but this is the best place you could have ended up, I assure you. He started walking to the opposite side of the room. I followed, but continued asking questions. So, this is the heaven? I made it here? But didn't I cause that terrible accident? He chuckled. Cause it? No, Jack. Even in your drunken state, you were trying to stop it from the side of the road, yelling over to that lunatic swerving all over the place. The memory was coming into focus. I wasn't driving. I was walking along the freeway with a bottle of whiskey in hand, making the trek to my wife and daughter's crosses, where they died years ago. Inebriated, I couldn't run away fast enough when the cars finally collided, caught in the wreckage as soon as the fireworks began. The man watched me as the revelation washed over me. Remember now, Jack? I nodded, relieved that I wasn't the reason those people were hurt. That brought me to my next question, a more pressing matter. My wife and daughter, are they here? Can I see them? The man offered me an apologetic look. I'm sorry, Jack. They've already been transitioned. Charlotte and Leslie are no longer with us. My heart sank. For an instant, I had hoped that I could see them again. Knowing the truth, it absolutely crushed me. I had to know more, to know that they were okay. When you say transitioned, what does that entail exactly? Does that mean they moved on? That they're at peace? We reached the end of the room where there was a single red door. The man grabbed the handle and opened it, gesturing for me to enter. Well, let me show you. Without any other options at my disposal, I hesitantly walked past the threshold of the door frame, and the man followed, shutting the door behind us. He then walked ahead and turned back to me, with his arms outstretched. "Welcome to our Hall of Operations." There was a tinge of pride in his voice when he said this. "Hall of Operations?" I asked, confused. "Please, right this way." We walked down the corridor, and he pointed out the various rooms along the way, all identical to one another. I looked through the small windows of their doors and saw people, some of which I recognized from the crash, lying on tables within, unconscious. There were others in the room with them, their hands held over their bodies, as a steady stream of blue glowing particles was extracted and absorbed, from what I could tell. "I don't understand. What is this?" The man was now grinning from ear to ear. "This is where the magic happens. A mutually beneficial transition between angel and human. We fulfill your wildest dreams, and in return, you give us a piece of your soul." For the first time since arriving in heaven, I was now worried. "You want a piece of my soul? Am I hearing this right?" He put a hand on my shoulder, undoubtedly in an effort to calm my nerves. "Don't worry, Jack. It's a mostly harmless procedure. You won't feel a thing." "Mostly?" I pushed his hand away and took a few steps back, scared of what I had gotten myself into. "Jack, please listen to me. As angels, we require the essence of human souls to sustain our life force. From birth, as a measure of evolution, a piece of your soul is sectioned off from the rest. You technically don't even need it. It was always meant to be passed along to us in the hereafter. It's the only part of you we can access." His explanation seemed genuine. I stood still and lent him an open mind as he continued. "While extracting this piece, you'll be locked away in your own mind. We can create for you your own personal heaven, anything or any place you want, and it's yours. An even trade if there ever was one." Upon hearing this, I gathered my composure and asked a question. "So, you could reunite me with my family?" "If that's what you want, then yes. Just know that it won't actually be them. It's all a fabrication of the mind. Just a very powerful one at that, but a fabrication nonetheless." I was vulnerable. My wife and child were gone. I had just died myself, and I had no idea what was going on. That's why, in this moment, his honesty was enough to earn him my trust. That, and the promise of what he offered. "I don't care. I just want to see them again." He nodded in agreement. "Very well. Follow me to your room and we'll begin the process." We walked past at least 100 doors or so, and that's when I noticed her, through one of the windows. It was the girl, the one who died next to me in the hospital. She was standing in a corner, as an angel closed in on her. My parental instinct kicked in and I burst into the room without hesitation. "What's going on here?" I demanded. The angel looked to the man behind me. "It's all right, Lucen. He knows her." Lucen turned his eyes to me and explained. "She's just a little scared, that's all. I was trying to help her." The young girl continued to cower in the corner, probably scared and confused with no idea where she was or what was happening to her. I took a deep breath and reeled back my initial aggression, now knowing what it was she was going through. I walked over and kneeled down in front of her. "It's okay. What's your name?" There was silence at first, but eventually, she spoke up. "Abigail. You can call me Abby." "It's lovely to meet you, Abby. I'm Jack." She was still nervous, but I could see the apprehension leaving her eyes as I continued to comfort her. "You know what, Abby? I have a daughter around your age. Her name is Leslie. You look a lot like her." Her face grew curious. "Really?" she asked. "Yes, really. You're the spitting image of her. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were twins." She laughed, and I with her. "Abby, I made a promise to my Leslie. I told her time and time again I would never let anything bad happen to her." Tears forced their way out and down my face. "Why are you crying, Mr. Jack?" I wiped the tears away and did my best to fake a smile. "I'm going to make that same promise to you, okay? These men might seem scary, but they're not here to hurt you. They're just going to put you to sleep and give you the happiest of dreams. It's confusing, I know, but you have to trust me. I won't let anything bad happen to you." She looked up at me and stared with an intensely serious look painted on her face, as serious as a 6-year-old could look. "You promise, right?" Another tear rolled down my face. I may have broken the promise I made to Leslie, but I can make up for it now, at least in some small way. "Yes, Abby, I promise." With that, Abigail was no longer scared, and the man and I left the room and continued down the hall. "She's not going to feel any pain at all, right?" the man answered while continuing his march forward. "No pain at all. You have my word." A few moments later, he stopped in his tracks. "All right, Jack, this is it." We were at my room. It was the same as the rest in every way, but it somehow felt tied to me. Perhaps I was just projecting. After all, this was to be my final resting place. Or was it? I wondered. "Say, what happens after the procedure is complete?" The man looked at me, puzzled. "When it's complete?" "Yes, what happens then? Do I stay in my dream world?" His eyes rolled a bit, and his lips scrunched up in contemplation. "Is that what you want, Jack?" I thought it over for a moment, but the answer was clear. Having an imaginary Charlotte and Leslie was better than not having them at all. "Yes, that is very much what I want." He smiled. "Then it's settled. Now please, lie down on the table." I did as instructed. "So, who will be my angel?" He pulled over a cart of utensils in preparation. "You're looking at him, Jack. We're all assigned specific souls. You're one of mine." I looked closer at the utensils. There were knives, scalpels, scissors, and something that looked akin to an oversized nutcracker. "What is all that?" I asked, growing worried again. "It's okay, Jack. While we do have access to this particular piece of your soul, it's difficult to get to. In the latter stages of the extraction, we'll need to clear off some of your skin and bone for easier retrieval." His words were no comfort, and he could tell. "Relax, Jack. Like I said earlier, you won't feel a thing. Soon, you'll be with your wife and daughter again, as happy as can be." He placed his hands over me to begin, and I tried my best to forget about the strange tools next to my head. Before he could put me to sleep, another angel walked in unannounced. "Sir, the fragmenter is full. What should we do with the soulless while it's being emptied? Hearing this, I sat straight up on the table. Fragmenter? Is that where I'm going after this is done? The man sighed and looked over at the angel who barged in. Bumbling idiot. This one's still awake. We almost had him. Oh no. That means Abigail. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know. The angel rushed off. I followed suit and stood up to make a run for the door. The man was too fast. He lifted me up and pushed me against the wall with incredible strength. Not so fast, Jack. You're not going anywhere. I'll rip that soul piece out, with or without your cooperation. His eyes, they turned a dark shade of red. His eyes, they turned a dark shade of red. And his teeth, they became razor sharp as his mouth opened wider than any humans could. My eyes darted down at the cart by his side. It was almost within reach. You're lucky, Jack. Not many people have seen an angel's true form. I managed to slip my arm out of his grip and grab one of the knives. Without a second thought, I lodged it as deeply as I could into his leg. All at once, his face reverted to normal, and he began writhing in pain, letting go of me and falling backwards in the process. I immediately ran out the door and down the hall as fast as I could. The promise I made to Abigail replaying in my mind, every step of the way. I couldn't save my family from this terrible fate, but I could at least save her. In the distance, I heard the man stumble out of the room and shout a command. Get him! Doors opened and dozens of angels left their posts to chase after me. Luckily, my head start was enough to escape their grasp. I was able to reach Abby's room with just enough time to open the door and shut it behind me before the stampede of celestial beings reached my position. Once inside, I looked at the center of the room. Abigail was on the table, awake. That means the extraction hadn't started yet. Lucien was standing at her side with the cart of utensils, now looking over at me, baffled. What's going on? He asked. I didn't offer him any answers. I simply ran over, picked up Abigail, and grabbed another knife from the cart. I then stood in the corner in a fighting stance, ready to fend off any would-be attackers. Mr. Jack, what are you doing? I looked at Abigail with a half smile. Abby, I made you a promise. I intend to keep it. She looked so confused. But you said, I interjected. I was wrong, Abby. These are not good men. Don't worry, I won't let them hurt you. Close your eyes and look away, sweetie. She hung her head over my shoulder and hugged me tight. I didn't know what I could realistically do to help her, but I would be damned if I didn't try. Just then, the man burst into the room, limping with a flood of angels following behind. Jack, put her down. She is of no consequence to you. My blood was now boiling. Like hell she isn't. You will not touch a hair on her head. Not if I have anything to say about it. Lucien made a move towards me. I readied myself. Lucien, don't. It's all right. I can handle it. Lucien backed off, and the man limped forward. I stood my ground. Jack, what do you plan to do exactly? Fight all of heaven's angels with one silver blade? I pointed down at his leg with the knife. It hurts, doesn't it? Well, with this, I can at least hurt you. Him and the other angels in the room laughed. Of course it hurts, Jack, but allow me to show you something. Watch closely. He snapped his fingers, and the wound was gone. No tear in his clothing, no more blood dripping from his leg. He even walked about in a circle to show me that it had truly healed. You see, Jack, we can do anything we want, even this. He held his arm forward, and the knife was pulled through the air by an unseen force, landing in his hand. I was now defenseless. I held on to Abigail as tightly as I could. You can't beat us, Jack. You're ours now. He stepped forward. I looked over at the little girl in my arms and thought of my little Leslie. I remembered the fond times I had with her and my wife, as well as the horrific aftermath of losing them. A specific memory bubbled to the surface and stood out above the rest. It was one of the many times I visited those crosses on the side of the freeway. It was dark, well past midnight on Christmas Eve of last year. There were no cars on the road, not a single one. Everyone was with their families for the holidays, rejoicing and partaking in the festivities. And here I was, on the side of the road, paying my respects to the family I no longer had. There would be no more holidays for us, no more of anything at all. I looked down at the unopened bottle of whiskey in my hand. I was 5 years sober up to that point. Didn't even drink the night they died. It wasn't how they would have wanted things to go. At least that's what I told myself. And I believed it. I believed they were still out there somewhere, looking down on me. And that kept me holding the wheel steady. But I realized, in this instance, darkness all around me, not a soul in sight, that I was truly and utterly alone. They weren't with me. They couldn't be. They were gone. They're dead, Jack. These words, now truer than they had ever been before, repeated in my mind as I stared down at the whiskey. It was as if the bottle itself was speaking, taunting me to put my lips to it and drink my misery away. And you know what? I did just that. Half the bottle was gone in mere seconds. I swear, I didn't even feel the burn as it swam down my throat. Or maybe it was just dull in comparison to the immense anguish I already felt. Either way, the guilt broke through and came through in waves, bringing me to my knees, directly in front of the wooden markers that memorialized my loss. Charlotte, Leslie, I'm so sorry. My face and neck were soaked in tears and whiskey drool. I'm sorry that I'm so weak. I can't do this without you. It should have been me instead. I wish it had been me. I leaned against the crosses and sobbed louder than I ever had before. Leslie, I couldn't protect you. My little girl. That was my lowest moment. A reminder of my failure as a parent. There was nothing I could have done to prevent their accident, but that didn't stop me from blaming myself. I took one more look at Abigail as the man took his final step in our direction. Wait, please wait. To my surprise, he stopped. What now, Jack? Gonna grovel for your lives? No, I said. I want to make a deal. The angels laughed again, louder this time. Oh, Jack, what could you possibly have to bargain with? My soul, I stated plainly. We already have access to both of your soul pieces. You'll have to do better than that. I quietly prepared myself for my final offering. I would be handing over everything to these foul creatures. As much as I didn't want to, it was all I could think to do. No, my entire soul, the whole damn thing. Send her back to Earth, intact. And when she eventually dies, she's off limits. Agree to these terms, and my soul is yours. An angel chimed in from the room's entrance. That's not even possible. We can't take more than a piece. The man spoke up. Actually, it is. The other angels now adorned looks of astonishment. It was clear that the man knew far more than them, things that were apparently above their pay grade. We can take an entire soul, but only at the full consent of its vessel. Even then, it's a difficult surgery. Still, I'm willing to give it a go. The benefits outweigh the risk. Jack, are you sure you want to do this? It'll be no walk in the park. You have to be absolutely sure. It won't work unless you give in completely. I nodded. Yes. Save the girl, and I'm yours. A grin I can only describe as being sinister stretched across his face. Very well, Jack. You have yourself a deal. Without warning, I became lightheaded. I saw the man and angel standing there, but they were now blurred, out of focus. I quickly put Abigail down before succumbing to the dizzy spell, and ultimately collapsing to the floor. Oh my God, he's breathing. He's back with us. My vision was still foggy. I could only make out the faint silhouettes of individuals huddled around me as I wavered in and out of consciousness. He needs oxygen, stat. After a minute or so, I passed out altogether. The next thing I knew, I was waking in a hospital bed, a nurse swapping out fluids on my IV. Oh no, I'm alive. But, Abby. Oh, you're awake. Glad to see you back in the land of the living. Things were getting pretty dicey there for a while. I had to know. That girl who was next to me, is she okay? What happened? She looked concerned. I don't know, sir. Please, calm down. Any sudden movements could break your stitching. It was my fear that revived me before the deal could be struck, before Abigail could be saved. God, I hope she's okay, wherever she is. Can you find out for me, please? Her name is Abigail. Before she could respond, another nurse showed up at the entrance of my room, holding the hand of a young girl. It was Abby. That's him. That's the man. She ran over and hugged me. The nurse with her chimed in. I'm sorry. She just insisted on seeing you. Says you helped her in the crash. Abigail turned around. Not the crash, in heaven. The nurse laughed a little. Oh yes, my apologies. In heaven. Abigail looked back at me and smiled, the same way Leslie used to. Thank you for saving me, Mr. Jack. We dislocated, and she went off with the nurse. A tear fell from my eyes as I watched her leave. Not one of sadness, but of joy. Abigail was safe. The only conclusion I can draw is that the angels made good on their deal just as I was being revived. With that said, they will more than likely show up at some point to collect on it. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, or maybe even after I finish typing this up. Whether I like it or not, those are the terms I agreed to. I've been through some serious hell in my life with the loss of my wife and daughter, and now I will go through even worse when my soul is removed. I'm sure of it. Like the man said, it won't be a walk in the park. Still, seeing that smile, something that wouldn't even have been possible a short time ago, I would do it all again. I would relive every second of pain I've ever felt and still make the decision to go through more, just to see her safe. It's what they would have wanted.